The grand hall of Thornvale Auction House shimmered beneath a canopy of crystal chandeliers, their glow refracting across the polished wood floors like fractured stars. Guests, cloaked in designer suits and silk gowns, sat in rigid silence, their eyes fixated on the massive mahogany doors at the far end of the room. Whispers had filled the corridors all evening, about the black stallion no one could tame. His name was Dustfire, and he was about to be led in. Draven Lockwood stood near the edge of the auction ring, his jaw tight, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The suit he wore was a deep navy, crisp and tailored, but the lines on his face betrayed a tension he could not mask. This wasn't just another acquisition. For Draven, this horse meant something far deeper, though he'd never admit it aloud. Not even to himself. His eyes flicked toward the crowd, scanning for one face. Kalen Darkridge, the spoiled aristocrat who had made it his mission to outbid him in every auction this season. The doors creaked open with a moan that silenced even the shallowest of breaths. Dustfire emerged, black as the void, muscles coiled with power, mane flowing like a banner in slow motion. He didn't prance like most show horses. He stalked into the room. There was something ancient in his eyes. Something wild. As the handler struggled to guide him toward the center, a low murmur rippled through the audience. Even the most jaded bidders sat forward in their chairs. $500,000, Draven called out, voice steady but hard. The crowd gasped. No one had even opened bidding yet. George Albright, the silver-haired auctioneer, barely had time to raise his gavel. "Do I hear 550? He called, his voice booming. 1 million, Kalen fired back, his tone sharp with arrogance. Gasps turned to scattered applause. Draven raised a single finger. 2. The room froze. Even Dustfire did. His hooves stopped mid-step, ears twitching. For a breathless moment, the stallion turned his head and locked eyes with Draven. Then, without warning, he reared, screaming, thrashing, nearly breaking free of the lead rope. The handler, a seasoned man, lost his grip. Dustfire bolted straight toward Draven. Gasps filled the room. Several guests stood up, clutching their pearls or backing away in alarm. But Draven didn't flinch. Not an inch. As Dustfire skidded to a halt mere feet away, his chest heaving, a silence heavier than death fell across the hall. And then, something no one expected happened. The horse turned his head and refused to look at the man who had just bought him. The silence after Dustfire's rejection stretched longer than it should have. For a heartbeat, it felt as if time itself had stopped. No one moved, no one spoke. Draven stood completely still, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Something unspoken. He stared at the black stallion with a strange emptiness in his eyes, as if searching for recognition. Dustfire, in turn, lowered his head slightly but kept his gaze averted, the tension in his body like a coiled spring refusing to release. Elowyn Thornvale, watching from a private balcony above, narrowed her eyes. She had seen thousands of horses behave badly under pressure, but this wasn't defiance. It was recognition laced with rejection. She jotted down a note quickly, then turned to one of the attendants beside her. "Bring the horse back to the stables, and keep him away from anyone until I've examined him myself." Her voice was calm, but inside, her instincts were screaming. Dustfire's reaction was not just emotional. It was personal. Down on the floor, George Albright cleared his throat and attempted to restore order. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a successful bid. $2 million to Mr. Lockwood." There was no applause. Only the sound of Dustfire's hooves echoing as he was led away, his head held high, his eyes now blazing with something dark. Rage? Memory? No one could say for certain. Draven didn't move until the stallion disappeared behind the heavy velvet curtain. And even then, he didn't speak. He simply walked away. Outside the auction hall, the night had fallen thick and windless. Draven's car waited at the curb, engine quietly humming. As he approached, his driver, Martin, opened the door without a word. But before stepping in, Draven paused. A memory crept up on him, uninvited and unwelcome. His daughter's laughter in the old stables, her soft voice whispering to a jet-black foal. That was 10 years ago. And yet the memory struck like it had never left. Inside the car, he sat in silence. The city lights passed by like ghosts on the windowpane. Dustfire's eyes haunted him, not because they were wild, but because they were familiar. There was something in the way the stallion looked away, like he knew him. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Far behind, in the darkened stables of Thornvale, Dustfire stood alone in his stall. He refused food. He paced in tight, angry circles. And then, he let out a single, low, aching sound. Not a neigh, not a snort. It sounded almost like grief. The next morning, Thornvale stables were unusually quiet. Elwyn Thornvale stood just outside Dustfire's stall, watching the black stallion with narrowed eyes. The animal had not touched his feed. His muscles twitched with every faint sound. But more unsettling was how Dustfire kept turning his head toward the empty corridor, as if expecting someone to return. Or someone long gone. Elwyn, experienced as she was, had never seen such behavior. She wasn't sure if Dustfire was grieving or waiting. Inside the stall, Dustfire's eyes followed her. They weren't wild, not anymore. They were focused, calm even. But when Elwyn stepped closer and gently reached out her hand, Dustfire backed away, not violently, but deliberately. His gaze broke from hers, turning to the corner of the stall. It was the same rejection he had shown Draven. Something about the man had triggered this. Elwyn felt it in her bones. Elsewhere on the estate, Draven Lockwood sat alone in the Thornvale guest lounge, a cold cup of coffee untouched on the table before him. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust in the air, but his thoughts were trapped years behind. He hadn't set foot near a horse in over a decade. Not since Abigail. He had buried those memories so deeply, he barely allowed himself to think her name. And yet, Dustfire. The moment their eyes met, something inside him cracked. It was like being recognized by a ghost. Mydra Ashvale, keeper of Thornvale's bloodline records, approached Elwyn with a folder in hand. "You need to see this," she said softly. Inside were the breeding documents for Dustfire, going back nearly 11 years. "There's a gap in his history," Mydra whispered, "between birth and age 3. The records were sealed. No location, no owner, only a single handwritten note, property of B, and the rest was torn." Elwyn looked at the page, her heart beginning to race. That wasn't a clerical error. That was a cover-up. Later that evening, Elwyn made her way to the guest wing where Draven was staying. She knocked, but there was no answer. The door was ajar. Inside, she found Draven sitting in silence, holding an old photograph in his hand. It was faded, but clear enough. Abigail Lockwood, no older than 16, standing beside a foal with a white blaze on its chest. Elwyn didn't need to ask. She already knew. Down in the stables, Dustfire stood still, ears twitching, as if hearing something others couldn't. He lifted his head slowly and stared at the door. Draven didn't speak for a long time. He simply stared at the photograph, his thumb resting gently over the white blaze on the foal's chest. Elwyn stood in the doorway, not daring to interrupt. She had come to question him, but now the look on his face made her hesitate. It wasn't the stoic mask of a millionaire. It was grief, raw and unshielded. "You knew Dustfire," she finally said, not as an accusation, but as a quiet truth. Draven didn't respond. Not with words. He slowly set the photograph down on the table beside him and exhaled. "His name wasn't Dustfire then," he said at last. Abigail called him Shadow. Elowyn stepped in, heart beating faster. Abigail Lockwood? Draven nodded. My daughter. The silence that followed was so complete it made the ticking of the antique wall clock unbearable. Elowyn sat across from him. What happened to her? She asked gently. Draven looked away, jaw tight. She disappeared. 10 years ago. After a fight. I said things I can never take back. In the stables, Dustfire stood perfectly still, as if sensing his name spoken from a distance. Zyra Coldwind had arrived silently earlier that day, wandering the grounds with no explanation. No one had invited her, yet she moved like someone who belonged. Her eyes lingered on Dustfire with unsettling stillness. She didn't speak to the horse. She didn't even try to touch him. She just stood, unmoving, as if sharing in some wordless memory. When Mydra asked who she was, she only whispered, "Someone who's been watching for a very long time." Back in the guest lounge, Draven finally looked up. He was just a colt when we got him. Broken-legged and terrified. Abigail spent every waking moment nursing him. Said he wasn't like the others. That he listened. He paused. After she left, I sold the horse. Couldn't bear to see him. I thought, if I erased him, I could erase the pain. Elowyn leaned forward. But you didn't erase him. You gave him a new name. You tried to forget, but he didn't. Do you think he remembers her? Draven asked, almost a whisper. Elowyn didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I think he remembers the last thing he saw. And it wasn't her. The next morning, Dustfire refused to let anyone near him again, except one person. When Elowyn returned, the stallion stepped toward her, slow but deliberate. And then, without warning, he let out a low, breathy sound. Almost a whimper. Almost her name. Elowyn barely slept. Dustfire's soft, broken sound from the day before haunted her like an echo in the back of her mind. She'd spent years studying equine behavior. She had seen horses mourn, even show loyalty, but this was different. This wasn't instinct. It was recognition. It was personal. That morning, she returned to the stables early. Before the sun had fully risen, the mist still curling along the paddock fences like ghosts reluctant to leave. Dustfire stood still as a statue when she approached. His ears twitched, but he didn't shy away. Elowyn raised a hand slowly, palm open. This time, he didn't turn his head. Instead, he stepped forward and gently pressed his nose into her palm. A flicker of breath. A moment of fragile trust. Then, something shifted. His gaze lifted to look behind her. She turned, startled. Draven Lockwood stood at the stall door, frozen. For a split second, Elowyn saw something she hadn't before. Dustfire's muscles tensed, but his eyes, they didn't rage. They mourned. I shouldn't be here, Draven said, his voice rough. He doesn't want me near him. Elowyn kept her hand on Dustfire's muzzle. That may be true, she said gently. But maybe he needs to see you anyway. Draven stepped forward slowly, inch by inch, until he was within arm's reach. Dustfire didn't move, but the tension in the air felt like glass ready to shatter. Elowyn stepped aside. Try. Draven raised his hand. It trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. Regret. Shame. Memory. He placed it near Dustfire's neck, but before he could touch him, the stallion pulled back, not with violence, but with finality. His ears pinned. His eyes locked onto Draven's. Not angry. Not wild. Just wounded. And then, as if reliving something no one else could see, Dustfire let out a single sharp snort and stepped back into the shadow of his stall. In the silence that followed, Draven looked away. It's the same look Abigail gave me, the night she left. His voice cracked slightly, the words barely audible. "She didn't run away. I pushed her. I told her to grow up, to stop dreaming, to forget the damn horse. She cried. And then she vanished." Elowyn felt her chest tighten. "You think he blames you?" Draven shook his head slowly. "No. I think he's waiting for her." That night, as the wind rose across the fields, Dustfire stood at the edge of his paddock, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. He didn't blink. He didn't move, as if expecting someone to come walking out of the past. Someone who never said goodbye. The storm rolled in without warning. Heavy clouds swallowed the sun, casting Thornvale in a gray hush. The air thickened, as if holding its breath. Elowyn stood by the paddock fence, arms crossed tightly around her body, eyes locked on Dustfire. He hadn't moved from the far end of the field since sunrise. Just stood there, watching the tree lean like a sentinel frozen in time. Horses didn't do that without reason. Something was pulling at him. Something deep. Back inside the archive room, Mydra Ashvale ran her fingers along the spines of old leather-bound ledgers. She hadn't slept much, either. The torn breeding record still gnawed at her. Why was Dustfire's early history sealed? And who was the bee listed as the original owner? She paused, pulling a forgotten volume from the shelf, one with a cracked spine and no label. Inside, the ink was faded, but on the last page, a note was scribbled hastily. Foal delivered to Blackvale Estate, unregistered, gifted to, and then a name. Abigail Lockawood. Mydra's heart stopped. That was it. That was the missing link. She grabbed the book and ran to find Elowyn. When she arrived at the paddock, Elowyn read the page in stunned silence. "He wasn't just her horse," she whispered. "He was a gift, born for her." A gust of wind kicked up, and Dustfire suddenly whinnied sharply, louder than anyone had heard since his arrival. He spun, racing across the paddock toward them. It was not panic. It was purpose. Draven appeared at the fence just in time to see the stallion charge. For a terrifying second, he thought Dustfire was going to break through. But the horse stopped short, rearing high, hooves slicing the air. And then he dropped to his knees. Elowyn gasped. Horses didn't kneel. Not unless they were trained to. Not unless they remembered. "It was a trick," Draven said, voice distant. "Abigail taught him that, to bow when he felt safe." The words barely escaped him before his knees buckled too. He leaned against the fence, trembling. He remembers her. He remembers everything. In that moment, something shattered inside Draven. The years of coldness, of denial, of pretending he hadn't failed her, all of it cracked under the weight of Dustfire's silent message. Tears streamed down his face as Dustfire rose to his feet and stood before him, eyes soft. Not forgiving, but no longer closed. As lightning broke across the sky, Elowyn stepped back and looked at Mydra. "There's more," she said. "This horse, he didn't just witness what happened 10 years ago. I think he was the only one who truly knows." Rain fell in thin, cold sheets over the Thornvale estate, soaking the paddocks and turning the distant hills into watercolor smears of gray and green. Dustfire remained outside, unmoved by the weather. He stood beneath a lone oak, his body still, head slightly lowered. Draven watched him from the covered porch, shoulders hunched, coat clutched tightly at the collar. He hadn't spoken since the stallion had bowed. Something in him had cracked open, and now he was afraid of what might come pouring out. Elowyn entered quietly, her boots wet and muddy from the stable paths. She didn't say much, just placed a warm mug of tea beside him and sat in the chair across the way. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. "You never looked for her," she said finally. Draven didn't look up. I told myself she didn't want to be found, that she left to hurt me, to teach me a lesson. He swallowed. But the truth is, I didn't want to face what I'd done. Far out by the fence, a shadow moved through the mist. Zaira Coldwin. She stood barefoot in the wet grass, her long dark coat billowing, hair plastered to her face. No umbrella, no sound, just her, watching. Dustfire turned his head slowly toward her. His body tensed, ears tilted forward. Then he stepped forward, one hoof at a time, steady and sure. Elowin saw it from the porch and froze. "Draven, look." Zaira didn't flinch as the stallion approached. He stopped just feet from her, towering and soaked. But he didn't rear, didn't challenge. He dipped his head, not in submission, but familiarity, recognition. Zaira raised a trembling hand, touched his muzzle lightly, and closed her eyes. "You kept the secret," she whispered, "all these years." Inside the house, Mydra burst into the room, clutching a file folder soaked at the edges. "There's a record," she said breathlessly. "A veterinary tag assigned to Dustfire when he was a colt, under a false name. The original owner listed as Z. Coldwin." Elowin stared at her. "She was never a stranger," she murmured. "She was part of it from the beginning." Draven rose slowly, heart pounding. He stepped out into the rain, walking toward the fence where Zaira stood. Dustfire remained between them like a guardian. "Who are you?" Draven asked, voice hoarse. Zaira turned her eyes on him, haunted, tired, and full of something ancient. "The only one who knew where your daughter went," she said softly. "And why she never came back." Draven stood frozen in the rain, his breath shallow, soaked through but unmoving. Zaira Coldwin's words hung in the air like thunder that hadn't struck yet. "The only one who knew where your daughter went." Behind her, Dustfire remained still, watching, silent, almost protective. The stallion's gaze no longer held fear or resistance. It held understanding. And sorrow. Draven felt it in his bones. Whatever Zaira was about to say would break him open. "She didn't run away," Zaira said, her voice steady despite the storm. "She was hiding. From you. From what happened that night." Her hand gripped the fence, knuckles white. "Abigail didn't leave because she stopped loving you. She left because you didn't believe her." Draven's face twisted. "Believe her about what?" His voice cracked. Zaira didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked to Dustfire. "About the man who tried to take the horse that night. The man you claimed would never betray you. Silric Holofen." The name slammed into Draven's memory like a door ripped off its hinges. His former stable master. Trusted, loyal, or so he believed. Elowin, now standing behind Draven, gasped softly. "He was there that night?" Zaira nodded. "He came for the horse. Claimed Dustfire was too valuable to belong to a child. Abigail fought him. He got violent. She screamed for help, but you..." Zaira's voice faltered, softer now. "You were too busy shouting at her. You thought she was being dramatic." Draven's knees buckled slightly. The memory began to reshape itself. The shouting, the slammed doors, the crying. The sound he had dismissed as a tantrum. Was her begging for help? "Where did she go?" he asked, voice hollow. Zaira looked away. "I took her," she said. "I was there to assess the foal for purchase. I saw everything. She ran to me. She was bleeding, terrified. I couldn't leave her there. So I hid her." Draven's breath caught. "All these years, you hid my daughter?" "I protected her," Zaira said. "She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. Dustfire was all she had left. When she passed 2 years ago," her voice broke. She made me promise I'd find him again, that I'd make sure he ended up where he belonged. A silence fell so heavy it seemed to mute the storm itself. Draven looked at Dustfire, who stepped forward and nudged him, gently, just once. It was not affection. It was closure. Behind them, the trees swayed. Elowin whispered, "You weren't just buying a horse. You were being brought back to her." The early morning light filtered weakly through the fog hanging over Thornvale, casting a pale glow on the damp earth. Draven sat alone on the porch, hands wrapped tightly around a cold cup of coffee, his mind a storm of regret and hope. Dustfire stood nearby, calm but alert, as if sensing the weight of the moment. The truth had been laid bare, years of silence shattered, but now came the hardest part: what to do next. Elowin approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the wooden planks. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said gently, sitting beside him. Draven didn't look at her at first. "I pushed Abigail away," he murmured. "I told her to forget her dreams, to grow up. And she listened. She left because I made her feel invisible." His voice cracked, the years of pain spilling out like a dam breaking. "But now, I have a chance to make it right. With Dustfire. With her memory." Outside, Dustfire shifted, lowering his head toward Draven. The horse's presence was a silent reminder of the bond that once was and could be again. Draven reached out tentatively, his hand trembling as it hovered over Dustfire's mane. When the stallion nudged his palm, it was more than acceptance, it was forgiveness. A chance to heal wounds deeper than flesh. Mydra joined them, carrying a weathered box filled with old letters and photographs found in the Blackvale estate archives. "These belong to Abigail," she said softly, handing the contents to Elowin. The letters revealed a young woman's dreams, hopes, and fears, especially about Dustfire and her fractured family. As Elowin read aloud, Draven listened, each word tearing at his heart and weaving threads of redemption. Meanwhile, Zyra remained at the edge of the paddock, watching quietly. She had kept her promise to Abigail, to protect Dustfire and ensure he found his way back. Now, seeing Draven's quiet resolve, she allowed herself a rare, fragile smile. The past was heavy, but the future was still unwritten. As the sun finally broke through the mist, casting golden light over the estate, Draven stood and faced the paddock. "I'll never bring her back," he said, voice steady but filled with sorrow. "But I can honor her memory. I can give Dustfire a home, and maybe in doing so, find a piece of her I thought I lost forever." The stallion's ears flicked forward, as if understanding the promise in those words. The first light of dawn spilled gently over Thornvale, painting the fields in soft hues of gold and rose. Draven stood at the edge of the paddock, the cool morning breeze stirring the loose strands of his silver hair. Beside him, Dustfire grazed quietly, the powerful stallion now calm, almost serene. It was as if the weight of years had lifted from both their shoulders, replaced by a fragile hope that neither dared to name aloud. Elowin approached carrying a fresh bucket of feed. She paused, watching the two silently. "They say healing takes time," she said softly, "but sometimes it starts with a single moment like this." Draven nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Dustfire. "It feels like the first day of the rest of my life," he replied, voice thick with emotion. The horse lifted his head and met Draven's gaze, a quiet understanding passing between man and beast. Inside the estate, Mydra carefully placed Abigail's letters and photographs into a newly restored chest. "Her story deserves to be told," she said with conviction. "Not as a tragedy, but as a testament to love and resilience." The others gathered quietly, feeling the weight of that promise settling in the room. They knew this was more than just a horse or a lost daughter. It was a legacy of healing that would echo through generations. Later that afternoon, Zyra stood beneath the ancient oak where Dustfire had first waited, her eyes misty. She whispered a farewell to the past, knowing she had fulfilled her promise to Abigail. Turning, she left the estate, leaving behind a quiet peace that had long been missing. The shadows that had haunted the land were finally lifting. Draven walked slowly back toward the house, his steps lighter than they had been in years. The pain of loss still lingered, but it no longer ruled him. Dustfire's presence was a living reminder that love, even when fractured, could find a way to mend. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land, Draven allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a decade, it was a future he wanted to face. As night fell over Thornvale, the stars twinkled like silent witnesses to a story that had finally found its peace. Somewhere, in the quiet spaces between memory and reality, Abigail's spirit stirred, free at last, and forever part of the land she had loved. And Dustfire, majestic and proud, stood guard, no longer just a horse, but a guardian of hope.